MAGA Republicans held a hearing today, or are holding a hearing today, about the EPA. It's an oversight hearing, and the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Michael Regan, is in front of these congresspeople. And a few different moments here. We'll start with Boebert. First, the administrator, again, Michael Regan, calls Lauren Boebert out in front of everyone for sort of being two-faced. Privately, you seem to acknowledge the good work that we do. Privately, you like initiatives we head up in your district. But publicly, you act like we should get rid of the Environmental Protection Agency altogether. And Lauren Boebert quickly, you can see it, panics and tries to talk over him, because I think she knows what he's referencing. And it's like, stop. And then we'll look at a Democrat having to brutally fact check Lauren Boebert. But before playing any of that, this is just for context, a part of the broader belief from these sorts of individuals. MAGA Republicans, and for some time conservatives, had this strand of conservatism, which was a belief that some of these regulations, or let me say it a different way, that rolling back regulations is inherently good. Anything the government's doing to regulate a given industry, or to protect the planet, or to make sure the air we're breathing in, the water we're drinking is clean, that all of that inherently has to be bad. And what we've said before is it's a strange thing. Trump talked about, we rolled back more regulations than any other administration. And we'll look at the impact of that in just a second here. But why on earth would that be your stance, one way or another? For regulation's sake, more or less is not inherently good. It's what are you doing? And they're not great at making a case for why the individual regulations are bad in talking about not dumping toxic waste into water. So instead, it has to be a broader, we just need to get rid of regulations, and then that gets us all the way to the Department of Education should be abolished, the EPA should be abolished, and then you go on down the line. One time, Ron DeSantis just listed off a bunch of, I think he said the Department of Commerce, just a bunch of departments, just abolish all of them, not understanding what the outcome of that would be. So here's Lauren Boebert perpetuating that in a few clips, but first being called out by the EPA administrator, Michael Regan.
It's just shocking. You spend so much time with our regional staff and regional administration in Region 8 and have such productive conversations about how we're doing things for your district and your state. And then you take this microphone and you
I've also seen the coal plants that have been decommissioned in my state.
Whoa, Michael, don't you dare expose me in front of everybody.
And then you take this microphone and you
I've also seen the coal plants that have been decommissioned in my state.
100% we should not
I've seen the energy regulations that have regulated my district into poverty.
You're spending time with my staff.
Sure.
In your district.
Of course I am. I have oversight over your staff, and I want them to answer. I want them to provide a service for the American people.
Complimenting them
but there
about
are so much. Yes, there are some things that have been done well, but not everything.
100%
when we have $617 billion per year in rulemaking, that is absolutely absurd. When you are taking our affordable clean energy and regulating it out of existence and killing these good...
Of course, incorrect, but ASIN described this as Administrator Reagan is not a fan of Boebert's grandstanding, and because he's the witness, he did have to... All right, well, I guess this is your time. You can go back to your grandstanding. And while it sounds like she's trying to make a case that, no, I get that you do some good things, I'm just saying let's fix the bad things, which... Again, the reason why rhetoric can be so deceptive is because often these individual politicians like Lauren Boebert are hoping that their followers and supporters don't fact check them or don't dive a little bit under the surface. And so on its face, that sounds reasonable. I've complimented you and those you work with because you do some good things. And I do like initiatives that you've brought to my district in some ways, and then I'm against certain things. Well, that's everybody. I could find regulations, I'm sure, that are inefficient, should be adjusted or removed. But we also have a clip from this same hearing where she's not just saying, let's adjust, let's save money around the edges, or let's reduce the budget. She's saying this.
And, even in our appropriations bill in the House this year, the funding has been reduced by 20%. I would argue that it needs to be reduced by 100%.
reduce the funding by 100%. This whole hearing is perpetuating the idea that is the current stance of many Republicans, that we should just get rid of the Environmental Protection Agency altogether. An agency, by the way, that was created by Richard Nixon, just to give you a sense on this issue, how the Republican ideology has shifted. Just a lickety-split pause to request you, if you're not already, to subscribe to the YouTube channel by clicking that subscribe button. So easy and free, but it makes all the difference in the world. Appreciate it. Back to the video. Before getting to Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman calling out Lauren Boebert and having to fact check her confusion on one of these things, here is Democratic Congresswoman, friend of the show, I think you could say, from our conversation in the spin room. And she is also making a similar point about what Reagan's pointing out, which is the two-faced characteristic, or just these Republicans being willing to benefit, like we see with Democratic policies, benefit from certain policies, but then denounce them publicly for the sake of ideology.
When we look at where this money is going from this administration, Rep. Jordan's district got $500,000. The chair's district got about $1.6 million in EPA grants. Rep. Green's district got $500,000. Rep. Luna's district got $300,000, and Rep. Perry's district got $1 million. So for Republicans that may feel a way about EPA and it allegedly pushing a woke agenda, I just want to know, can we get the money back?
Ooh, brutal. Yeah. And that reminded me of this just quickly from Newsweek. House Republican Lauren Boebert was criticized by the White House and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg on Wednesday after posting about having secured over $51.4 million for the South Bridge, despite the funding coming from legislation the Colorado lawmaker voted against in 2021. And this has been a reoccurring theme with Boebert. She privately will beg the Biden administration for funding from some of these things. She'll privately clearly like these things. She'll publicly take credit for the policies, the funding, the projects that are benefiting her district, and then simultaneously take pride in obstructing all of Biden's agenda items and voting against the very legislation making these things possible. So it's a similar phenomenon. Behind the scenes, they see the benefit and ask for some of these initiatives to be brought their way. They see that some of them are probably popular and good for people, but because of this weird lack of a dedication to any serious governance or just weird extremism within their ideology, they refuse to publicly be supportive of some of these things. Then here, Lauren Boebert just seems really discombobulated about something, and Dan Goldman tries to clear it up.
I'm asking about the EPA, and I'm asking about your rogue bureaucrats that have enacted these unconstitutional regulations. Are you going to repeal them? Are you going to continue to implement them, or are you going to stop altogether since it's been overturned?
Do you understand the ruling?
Do you understand the ruling of the Supreme Court?
I do. And so your question is ill-formed. No.
Will you be repealing?
We're not going to stop.
I haven't really taken note of, to be honest, Michael Reagan in his position as administrator, except for a story maybe back some time ago. But seeing him in this hearing, this is Pete Buttigieg stuff, right? In terms of his engaging with Republicans, just I love the energy and the tone, and he's making great points.
Ill-formed. No.
Will you be repealing?
We're not going to stop.
You're going to unconstitutionally continue with these rulemakings.
We're going to adhere to the Supreme Court and continue to do
which rulemakings are you going to roll back?
We're going to adhere to the Supreme Court and continue to do our work in accordance to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court.
So which ones are you going to repeal?
The Supreme Court didn't tell us to repeal anything.
They have been deemed unconstitutional.
No.
Absolutely, they have. This was a huge victory.
Mr. Reagan, I don't want to spend too much time.
Sorry, before Goldman, I love that Reagan ends it by just laughing at Boebert. That's the appropriate reaction.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I would just like to clarify a few things for my colleague from Colorado. The Loper-Bright ruling, as you know, said that the courts should not defer to agency rulemaking if a statute is ambiguous, and instead the courts get to determine whether or not what the statute means. Is that your understanding as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that would not require any regulations to be reversed or overturned, correct?
Correct.
Right. So they're on the same page. Boebert is struggling to find the book. Okay, I'll say on that one. And then you also have this.
Is it true that the EPA has never obtained formal authorization legislation from Congress?
I'm sorry?
Is it true that the EPA has never obtained formal legislation, authorization legislation from Congress? It's never been authorized by Congress.
EPA is not authorized by Congress?
I'm asking you.
I thought EPA was authorized by Congress.
Well, the EPA is not. The EPA has never been formally authorized by Congress.
I'll be less blunt on this one because I'm a little bit unclear on what's being clarified there. But we know for sure based on the appropriations process that indeed they're choosing to fund the EPA every time they allocate funds to it, as is a part of this debate. But I'm not really sure on that one. But I do want to make a point before getting to my favorite and least favorite Lauren Boebert hearing moment in history. I do want to remind people that there's a very real point here. I think it's easy for two reasons to ignore the details of the importance of calling out and preventing, for example, the abolition of the EPA, or the rolling back of some of these key regulations, or just a broader, which is a part of the Project 2025 framework, elimination of just as many institutions as we can. Just, again, the Department of Education is one of their favorites. Get rid of that. And so many other things. Many Republicans, including DeSantis again, called for the complete elimination of the IRS. How are we going to manage the tax system? I don't know. But there's actually a really important outcome to these things. And the reason it's hard, like I said, for two reasons to focus on that is because you have what we find as the most consequential foundational issues in this election, meaning our democracy being at stake, basic rights being at stake, and also the cartoonish, silly nature of some of these figures, like Lauren Boebert, when she's trying to sort of struggle her way through these hearings. There's something just funny about that. And then her being fact-checked, there's just entertainment value there. But while I don't think she necessarily knows exactly why she's pushing for certain things, there is an underlying ideology there, which is why she's pushing it, that has such negative repercussions. So Trump's another good example of this, right? When he was president, I don't think he personally walks around and really wants to roll back EPA regulation. That's just a passion of his. I don't think so. But he, as the most powerful person in the country when he was president, did facilitate an administration that was so aggressive in rolling back some of these regulations that protect us as people living in this country. The New York Times reports the Trump administration rolled back more than 100 environmental rules. Here's the full list, and they go through all these different rules, and the outcome is that they roll back long-standing protections for the nation's waters, including approximately half of all wetlands and potentially millions of miles of streams. The Trump rule allows polluters to pave over wetlands and dump pesticides, mining waste, and other pollutants directly into these now unprotected waterways. And this piece from the Center for Biological Diversity goes further, but I'll stop there. Point is, I said in a past segment, when talking about climate change, I think the complexity of both the causes, the science, and then the outcome of those causes makes it easier for some of these followers of Republican leaders to go, similar to how there's this lack of belief now in medical professionals because of a bunch of conspiracy theories. It's easy now within the MAGA movement to say the experts, the science, people, Candace Owens saying the cult of science, and that makes it easier to go climate change. That's just another liberal hoax. And so let's just set aside a more complicated discussion about climate change and focus in on, do you want MAGA? Let's pretend that you lived next to a river, okay? And that river is something that you wanted to swim in occasionally, something that you got water from. And would you want pesticides, toxic waste, other harmful substances and materials to be dumped into that? But that's what the Trump administration was helping to facilitate. Or if you're, I said on, I don't know if it was a bonus show or something, no one would want to sit behind the exhaust pipe of a car and go, right? So in a basic sense, can you agree that certain things to keep our air breathable would be good? Maybe. Everyone understands that if you're in a garage, you close the garage door and you run the car for a while, that's probably bad. Well, just imagine that, but on a bigger scale. You don't want to breathe that in. So why wouldn't we want to implement things that protect us on a basic level before going into other things, like how the temperature is rising and stuff? I just think it makes sense. MAGA, no? Come on. Now, here is, and also, last thing, whenever they act like, no, but these regulations aren't just protecting people, it's also bogging down our economy. It's preventing economic growth because it becomes so hard to run a business. Just remember, over the last century, Democratic administrations have overseen much better economic performance, undeniably. So clearly, the party that's a little bit more aggressive sometimes with protecting people through some of these policies, that doesn't prevent economic growth as shown by the record between the two parties. Okay, here is Lauren Boebert some time ago, fixated on urination.
Mr. Allen, based on these statistics, I would like to talk to you about some other things that are going on here in Washington, D.C., specifically an initiative that you led. In November of 2022, you led the charge to reform D.C.'s crime laws. Is that correct?
I chaired the committee that proposal came
You
through.
led this charge, yes, sir. And these changes are now law here in D.C., correct?
Do you mean the revised criminal code?
Yes.
No, those are not the law.
Those are not the law. With
You
The
overturned
revised
you
criminal
overturned them.
code was rejected by.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'm talking to Mr. Allen.
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Allen, did you or did you not decriminalize public urination in
No, we did not.
Washington, D.C.? Did you lead the charge to do so?
No, the revised criminal code left that as a criminal charge.
Did you lead the charge to decriminalize public urination in Washington, D.C.?
No, ma'am. That in the
Did you
revised
ever
criminal
vote
code
in favor of decriminalizing public urination in Washington, D.C.?
The revised criminal code that was
Did
passed by
you
the
ever
council
support?
kept it as a criminal offense.
And you support this?
I voted for it, yeah.
You voted to keep it as a criminal offense.
That's correct. The full council did.
We have records that show that you were in favor of removing that criminal offense and allowing public urination.
No,
Is that something that you intend to pursue in the future?
No, the legislation you're referring to that came from the Criminal Code Reform Commission changed public urination from a criminal to a civil offense. The council then changed that to maintain it as a criminal offense at the request of the mayor.
Thank you. I yield.
All right, so that it just didn't go anywhere, and it led to a lot of memes, we'll say. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. If you want to get an extra episode of the show daily and support the work that we do, you can do so easily by clicking the join button below.